What happens when a beloved icon walks into a studio that seems warm and familiar, only to discover that beneath the polite smiles lies a tension that could snap at any second? Today, we're taking you behind the scenes of a story that never aired in the way the public imagined. A tale of composure, unexpected confrontation, and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of relentless provocation. Imagine stepping into a room designed for smiles and laughter, only to feel a subtle shift in the air, a tension that signals that what you're about to face isn't routine. That was the energy the guest sensed as she walked past the cluster of cameras and stagehands, her sequined jacket catching the overhead lights, reflecting the brilliance of decades of show business experience. She had been on countless programs, from primetime specials to intimate interviews, each requiring a slightly different skill: charm, wit, humor, or empathy. But today, as she approached the chair at the center of the set, she felt something different. Backstage, the usual chaos of production buzzed with intensity. Microphones were tested, lighting grids adjusted, and crew members whispered into headsets. Coffee cups clinked as assistants handed over final scripts and last-minute notes. Even the makeup artists, who usually operated like silent ninjas, seemed unusually alert, catching every flicker of tension in the room. The air smelled of hairspray, stage polish, and anticipation. And there, seated across from where she would sit, was the host, a figure known for charm, intellect, and incisive questioning. Yet something in their demeanor hinted that today's interview might not follow the standard script. The smile was bright, the posture confident, but the eyes told another story. A glint of challenge, an intention that hinted this would be more than just a discussion about music or philanthropy. The guest took her seat, settling in with the poise that comes from decades of experience. Her fingers lightly drummed against her lap, a subtle tell for those who knew her. A sign she was thinking carefully, measuring each response, preparing for what was to come. She could feel the gaze of the host, the cameras, the crew, and the live audience simultaneously, all converging in a strange mixture of anticipation and silent judgment. For a moment, the world outside the studio seemed to pause. She was about to encounter something unexpected, a confrontation disguised as a conversation, and she sensed the stakes were higher than any chart or award she had ever pursued. The first questions seemed ordinary, almost innocuous. Inquiries about her latest work, the projects she had undertaken, her recent performances. She answered them with practiced warmth, each word chosen to convey authenticity without arrogance, a rare balance that had become her signature. But as the questions continued, they began to carry a sharper edge, subtle at first, then unmistakably pointed. Remarks about appearance, choices, and personal branding started to surface, delivered in a tone that suggested judgment more than curiosity. She noticed the audience shifting in their seats, sensing the subtle tension, and the other co-hosts exchanging uneasy glances, a silent acknowledgement that this segment was veering into territory unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She maintained her smile, calm and measured, but her mind raced. She catalogued every statement, noting which ones were designed to provoke, which aimed to unsettle, and which might be attempts to test her patience. The host leaned forward slightly, adopting a posture that indicated both engagement and challenge, words sharpened with a pointed delivery. The guest knew the pattern. She had seen it before. The questions were crafted to reduce decades of achievement to superficial criticism, to make her doubt herself publicly, to test whether charm could withstand pressure. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she let the questions come, listening, nodding, acknowledging each with grace, and waiting for the right moment to respond. The subtle shift in the studio was palpable. Camera operators adjusted, sensing the story developing in real time. Even the producers, usually calm and composed, leaned forward slightly in their chairs, aware that the segment was taking on a new gravity. The live audience, initially relaxed and expectant, began to murmur quietly, their attention now fully captured by the interaction unfolding before them. Something rare was happening. A conversation that could easily have devolved into hostility was being met with poise and confidence, a display of quiet authority that demanded attention without raising a voice. Then came the first truly pointed remark, one that seemed designed to diminish years of work, philanthropy, and personal achievement, reducing a storied career to superficial judgments. For a split second, the studio felt frozen, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. Cameras lingered, capturing the slight tightening of her hands, the faint narrowing of her eyes. Small gestures that betrayed nothing of her internal calculations, but conveyed enough to the attentive observer that she was assessing every angle, every nuance. Then, with a calmness that belied the intensity of the moment, she began to respond. Her voice was soft, steady, but carried an unmistakable clarity. She recounted her achievements, not with self-aggrandizement, but with facts. The millions of children impacted by her literacy programs, the thousands of jobs she had helped create, the artists she had mentored over decades. Each word was deliberate, reinforcing the truth of her contributions while contrasting sharply with the personal attacks aimed at her appearance and choices. The studio audience leaned in, captivated, sensing that this was not a routine segment but a masterclass in composure and integrity. As she spoke, the host faltered, the prepared lines suddenly inadequate in the face of measured truth. The shift was subtle at first, a hesitation in speech, a flicker of uncertainty in posture. The energy in the room changed. What had begun as a typical interview transformed into a study of power dynamics, perception, and resilience. The crew remained attentive, eyes scanning for cues, while the audience seemed collectively aware that they were witnessing something rare. A public display of grace under pressure, a real-time lesson in handling confrontation with dignity. Attempts to redirect or regain control were met with precise deflection, a gentle but firm refusal to engage in arguments that were irrelevant or misleading. Facts were stated plainly, intentions clarified, and the guest continued to maintain warmth and accessibility, even as she dismantled assertions that sought to belittle her. Each response was a strategic choice, balancing assertiveness with kindness, authority with empathy. The narrative, once framed as an attack, now subtly shifted, revealing the depth and complexity of her character and work. The host's demeanor began to show cracks. Words faltered, gestures sharpened, tone shifted from confident to defensive. Each attempt to reclaim dominance was met with measured, calm, and factual responses, turning aggression into a demonstration of intelligence and composure. The live audience was completely engaged, the energy in the room electric, with the contrast between visible frustration and composed authority. Crew members exchanged glances, realizing that the segment was moving beyond entertainment and into a moment that would be remembered. Finally, unable to sustain the facade, the host made a sudden decision, excusing herself abruptly from the discussion. Cameras lingered on the
guest, capturing her serene smile, the effortless posture, and the quiet confidence that had carried her through countless interviews and performances. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her skirt, and prepared to continue the segment, embodying the principle that true strength is revealed in stillness and dignity, rather than in raising one's voice or retaliating. The audience, released from the tension, erupted in applause. But this was not merely a response to celebrity or performance. It was an acknowledgement of the power of poise, integrity, and resilience in the face of unexpected challenges. Backstage, murmurs circulated, crew members replaying the confrontation in their minds, understanding that what had occurred was far beyond the scripted narrative, a genuine human moment that highlighted the contrast between judgment and accomplishment, aggression and grace. Meanwhile, the host, now off camera, was confronted with the reality that someone could meet criticism not with defensiveness, but with clarity and truth, leaving no space for personal attacks to succeed. It was a lesson in humility, perspective, and the unassailable power of acting with integrity. The guest had not only navigated the storm, but had reframed it entirely, demonstrating that composure, self-respect, and intelligence often speak louder than any forceful argument or cutting remark. And so, the story concluded, not with theatrics or shouting, but with a demonstration of quiet strength, a reminder that true courage often manifests as stillness, thoughtfulness, and unshakable belief in one's worth. As the audience cheered and the cameras rolled on, capturing the moment for posterity, one question lingered. How would those watching take it to heart? How often do we see confrontations resolved with dignity rather than drama? And most importantly, what does it teach us about standing firm in our own convictions, even when the pressure is immense? Now, pause and consider. Did she turn the tables with elegance and power? Or was this a moment that exposed vulnerabilities in ways the audience couldn't fully grasp? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because moments like these aren't just television. They're lessons in courage, presence, and the quiet, unyielding force of integrity. The moment the host left the set, the tension in the studio didn't evaporate. It thickened, settling over the crew, the co-hosts, and the audience like a heavy curtain. Cameras continued to roll, capturing the guests' serene composure, but the energy backstage was electric with speculation and whispered exchanges. Producers huddled, adjusting schedules and murmuring about contingency plans, while stagehands exchanged glances, all aware that the segment had already slipped into the realm of history-making. The guest, however, seemed untouched by the flurry around her. She straightened in her chair, fingers lightly folded on her lap, eyes scanning the room with a calm precision. What the public would never see was the invisible web of strategy she had deployed in those moments. Every word, every pause, every subtle nod had been measured in advance, not in anticipation of hostility from the host, but as a safeguard against the unexpected. She had learned long ago that the spotlight could amplify the smallest moment of hesitation, that even a faint falter could be misinterpreted as weakness. Yet now, in the midst of unscripted confrontation, she relied on instincts honed over decades, listening more than speaking, observing more than reacting, and using silence as both shield and tool. Backstage, assistants jotted down notes furiously, not for the segment itself, but for the potential fallout. The guest's reputation for charm and resilience was well known, but today it was on display in a way that seemed almost cinematic. Wardrobe assistants quietly adjusted her sequined jacket and scarf, ensuring she remained camera-ready while a makeup artist retouched her face, subtly blending highlights to capture the natural glow that cameras loved. Meanwhile, producers debated whether to cut to a commercial or let the segment continue uninterrupted. The consensus was clear. There was no cutting away from history in the making. As the guest began to respond to the subtle murmurs from her co-hosts, the focus shifted from confrontation to narrative. She leaned slightly forward, voice soft but deliberate, weaving a story that bridged decades of personal and professional achievement. She spoke of early struggles, of long nights in recording studios, of the risks taken when starting her first business, and of the courage required to pursue ambitious projects in a male-dominated industry. The anecdotes were punctuated with humility and humor, drawing the audience closer, inviting them into a world they rarely glimpsed, the private moments behind a public life, the challenges and triumphs that had shaped her into the figure they admired. Her recounting was more than mere storytelling. It was a tactical reclamation of the narrative. The host's attacks, which had sought to reduce her legacy to superficial critique, were quietly reframed through stories of empowerment, creativity, and generosity. She spoke of literacy programs that had touched millions of children, scholarships that had enabled young artists to pursue their dreams, and philanthropic endeavors that had transformed communities. Each point was layered with a subtle but undeniable assertion. Accomplishments are measured by impact, not by conformity to someone else's expectations. In the audience, reactions shifted from curiosity to awe. Gasps and murmurs followed each revelation, the quiet admiration building with each sentence. The cameras captured every subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the calm steadiness of her hands, the sparkle in her eyes as she recounted victories earned through hard work and perseverance. Co-hosts exchanged glances, no longer sure how to interject without undermining their own credibility. The energy in the room became almost tangible, a palpable sense that everyone present was witnessing not just a conversation, but a demonstration of human dignity and resilience under pressure. The guest's storytelling was interspersed with moments of reflection. She paused occasionally, allowing the weight of her words to settle in the room, letting the audience process the contrast between superficial critique and substantive achievement. Behind the scenes, crew members whispered about the lesson in strategic poise unfolding before them. A camera operator muttered to a colleague, "That's not just composure. That's teaching people how to respond to pressure without losing themselves." Every professional in the studio seemed to sense that they were seeing a masterclass in emotional intelligence and narrative control. At one point, a co-host attempted to interject with a question meant to shift the focus back to appearance and public image. The guest, however, subtly redirected the conversation, weaving the query into a larger story about self-empowerment, choice, and societal expectations. Each redirection was seamless, a reminder that control in dialogue isn't always about speaking louder, but about speaking with intention and clarity. She demonstrated how one could acknowledge the concerns presented while reframing them to highlight deeper truths about values, work ethic, and personal integrity. Meanwhile, the host who had stormed off backstage faced her own reckoning. She was in a private green room, pacing and muttering, realizing that the guests' calm, factual, and graceful responses had stripped away any leverage she had hoped to gain. Every attack, every cutting remark, had been met with substance, integrity, and composure, leaving the aggressor exposed as reactive rather than authoritative. In a way, the confrontation had become a mirror, reflecting the vulnerabilities of the instigator while
elevating the guest's strength. Back on set, the cameras captured another layer of subtle tension, the reactions of the production team. Executive producers whispered urgently into headsets, unsure whether to intervene or let the narrative play out naturally. Floor managers signaled crew to hold positions, while audio technicians monitored every word for clarity. Even the audience, caught between astonishment and curiosity, remained riveted, their collective energy feeding into the intensity of the moment. It was a rare confluence of theatre, reality, and unscripted human drama. Then came a moment that would define the segment in ways no one had predicted. The guest paused mid-sentence, looked directly into the camera, and spoke a line that was both gentle and firm. A statement of principle that reframed the entire narrative. In that moment, she wasn't merely defending herself, she was teaching everyone present a lesson in dignity, empowerment, and the quiet authority of truth. The audience responded immediately. Applause, nods, and a few gasps punctuated the moment, the emotional resonance spreading like wildfire through the studio. The host, returning from her brief retreat backstage, watched silently from a distance as the narrative had shifted irreversibly. Attempts to regain control were futile. The guest's calm authority dominated every frame, every statement, every gesture. The subtle power of listening, reflecting, and responding with integrity had transformed what could have been a confrontational debacle into an elegant demonstration of strength. Cameras captured the contrast perfectly. One person visibly rattled and reactive, the other composed, articulate, and commanding without aggression. This sequence continued for several more minutes, each exchange layered with psychological subtlety. The guest interwove humor with reflection, personal stories with larger societal commentary, and gentle corrections with pointed insights. The audience, both in the studio and at home, absorbed each moment, sensing the mastery of composure under scrutiny.
Capturing the reactions of crew members, co-hosts, and attendees, all now united in the recognition that something extraordinary had occurred. The guest rose gracefully, adjusted her jacket, and waved to the audience, embodying the principle that true authority is displayed through presence, integrity, and unshakable self-belief. In the quiet moments after the broadcast, as the lights dimmed and the crew began to disassemble the set, Conversations buzzed with analysis and reflection. Everyone present seemed to carry the weight of the lesson witnessed. Composure under pressure, the ability to reclaim the narrative, and the subtle, undeniable force of speaking truth with dignity. It was a reminder that confrontation does not have to lead to chaos, that power does not require aggression, and that respect is often earned by those who remain steadfast in their principles. And so, as cameras powered down and the studio emptied, the guest walked off with quiet confidence, leaving behind a room transformed by presence and integrity. The incident would be dissected in Conversations, remembered as a turning point, not only in the segment, but also in the understanding of how composure, strategy, and moral authority can shift dynamics in profound ways. The audience, producers, and co-hosts alike would carry the lesson forward, witnessing firsthand that true power often manifests not in loud declarations, but in quiet, unwavering strength, and the courage to remain true to oneself even when challenged. The question remains, in a world where confrontation often dominates, how much impact can quiet authority truly have? How often do we see composure, integrity, and thoughtful articulation triumph over provocation and aggression? And perhaps most importantly, what does this teach us about standing firm in our own convictions, even under the brightest, most scrutinizing lights?